My name's Scott Rathman. I'm an Aboriginal artist and my brand name is Rusted Tin. My grandmother's from the Aranda group in Alice Springs. She was born in a place called Hales River. She was part of the stolen generation, so she grew up in a mission called the Bungalows in Alice Springs. Then she worked as a domestic servant on a cattle station and then eventually fell pregnant and ended up down in Port Augusta, and that's kind of where my family, I guess, evolved from. My dad and his brothers and sister were all born there. I was born in Loxton, so my mum's German background. They were fruit block people in the Riverland, and so I was born there in Loxton, lived in Berry for a while, lived in Port Augusta, and then ended up down in Manapara in Adelaide's northern suburbs. And so, yeah, I've sort of, always had an interest in art, and then I guess, get caught up in all the things that life catches you up in. You've got to have the house, the job, the wife, the kids. And so I sort of did that for, 18 years, 20 years, and then eventually just decided that it was time to pursue my passion more than just a hobby and become a full-time artist. So I've pretty much lived in the northern suburbs most of my life, but in the last few years I've been living down here in the Port Adelaide area, now living in Ethelton, closer to the beach. Both my partner and I have a real love of water, so we enjoy being between the Port River and Semaphore Beach. I guess for me, the reason why I chose to sort of, pursue, doing art that was, contemporary but still had a cultural spin on it. One was to sort of honour my grandmother's memory, but also I have a real passion for education. When I left high school, I went to uni and studied to be a teacher, but I kind of had some bad experiences during prac teaching, so I decided that I didn't want to pursue teaching as a full-time gig. But I've always enjoyed working with kids and giving them an opportunity to learn more about whatever it is. So in terms of the cultural stuff, I don't like just going out and painting murals. I like to go out and do a workshop with students first and give them a little bit about me, a little bit about my family background, a little bit of culture, and then go in and paint the mural after that. I guess the thing is for me is that quite often their knowledge of of experiences is very low in terms of even their interactions with Aboriginal people. And so they've not often had an Aboriginal person standing in front of them in a classroom. Also someone that doesn't fit the stereotype of an Aboriginal person. I often can stand up and say to kids, I'm an Aboriginal person, and then 5 minutes later I can say, can you tell me what an Aboriginal person looks like? And they'll give me a description of a black person with a flat nose and curly hair, curly black hair. That's not me. So they have very limited experience dealing with Aboriginal people or having them in their classroom, but also the story attached of with my life. They might talk about stolen generation in their classroom, but they've never had a person in there that's had it affect their family, and so that you can see that they're really interested to learn more and more. I guess the problem is our systems that we have in place in education haven't got the capacity to teach that properly, or they don't utilise the resources around them to bring more Aboriginal people in to do that. So when I'm out talking to school kids about, especially when I've got young Aboriginal kids in the group, it's about saying to them that, being a role model for them, to say, look, anyone can do it. And that hard work is what gets you there. The other thing is that I often say to young kids is that whether they're Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal is that if you're not an academic, there's hope for you. You don't have to be, as an artist, you don't have to be the person that becomes a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or whatever. Every role, every job in the community is important, and I think during the times that we've been in right now, more than ever, we've been able to acknowledge, or hopefully people acknowledge, that people who are not in those sort of roles that we normally see as being the most important, but people like shop workers and cleaners, and those people have suddenly become really important. But I think artists are also, during this time, are really important as well, because art is something that sparks joy and happiness in people when we're not feeling the greatest, whether you're a musician or a visual artist. So I think, for me, it's about saying to anyone out there that's doing art that, you don't have to be ashamed of that. It can be a career. You've just got to do the hard work and you can get there. Hope's a really interesting thing because I think for Aboriginal people, You know, we've been given lots of promises over very long periods of time, and so hope becomes something that is almost meaningless. If you think about things like the 1967 referendum, you know, there was a lot of hope attached to that for Aboriginal people, and at the time my dad was only 18, so you know, I think for him, you know, that was kind of a big step in his life, and he probably had a lot of hope around that, and I guess my grandmother would have as well. You know, and then we sort of see along the times up to now, even the apology to the stolen generations, that generates a lot of hope, but then nothing changes or seems to change after those moments in time. And so I think that starts to extinguish any sense of hope that Aboriginal people would have that things are going to change. Especially now we're sort of seeing a resurgence in stuff, you know, looking at the Black Lives Matter movement is looking at, you know, Aboriginal deaths in custody, but also systematic and institutionalised racism. You know, we've been talking about that for a very long time, and still nothing changes. So I think hope's a really interesting thing that I sometimes find challenging to have a sense of what my hopes are for the future, because it's almost like they'll never happen. You know, especially in a broader sense of, you know, when we're talking about Aboriginal people as a whole. I guess I was really lucky to have, the relationship I had with my grandma was interesting. She wasn't the most open book, and I never really understood it as a young person. But now that I've learnt more about her history, that I can understand why she wasn't an open book. She was very closed and, you know, quite a hard woman in some ways. Not to me, but, you know, when say my dad was taking me out bush, she'd give him stern words about, you know, what he needs to do to protect me, and I'd never have any idea of that. But I guess I understand that now. So she, you know, for me, it's about honouring her memory and respecting her as an Aboriginal woman that went through all these experiences, and they're not my experience, but they're hers. The greatest influence in my life has been my dad. You know, he's an Aboriginal guy that's come from nothing. You know, grew up in Port Augusta, you know, in the west side, and they didn't have a lot of stuff. You know, they weren't wealthy people. You know, he was pretty much told at school that he'd amount to nothing. And watching him sort of continue to fight the battles, and as I've got older, I've, you know, respected that more and more, you know, to get where he was, and not seeking any credit for himself, but really just working for his people. You know, he's worked in Aboriginal affairs, worked in education, you know, in the Aboriginal section of that. So just people, you know, people like that have really worked hard to, you know, work for their people against all the barriers that they had, not just being poor, but being Aboriginal as well. You know, so my dad's probably the greatest influence on what I do. But I was lucky to have a whole lot of other Aboriginal people around me who were working with my dad at the time, who, when I was, you know, 14, 15, I just thought they were all, you know, idiots really. But as you start to get older and start to piece it all together, you think, wow, you know, I was so lucky to be around these people, because, you know, I start to talk like them. You know, we all want to grow up and talk like our parents, but you know, he's influenced me, and those other people have influenced me enough to realise that I'm proud of who I am, but also then to want to go out and use the voice that I have to educate others. So yeah, I guess I started out sort of just messing around with really abstract stuff as a youngster, and a bit of you know, drawing characters, and sort of during my teenage years, I kind of got more culturally aware of, you know, I always knew I was Aboriginal, but I didn't really know what that meant. And so once I started to explore what being Aboriginal actually meant, then I got interested in the arts. And I guess I've always been a person that enjoys talking and having a story to tell. And so as an Aboriginal artist, for me, it's all about being a storyteller. So I guess early on as an Aboriginal artist, I was kind of just finding my feet. I was kind of exploring, and I think that's the same for any artist. It's about finding where you fit in that term of what an artist is. You know, how do you fit to that? And so I was lucky enough to work with some Aboriginal artists during my teenage years, people like Muriel Vandenbill, and, you know, she was able to kind of just help influence me to find my own identity. I started out as a canvas painter, and painting objects like wooden bowls and little pots and stuff like that. And I guess over time, I've kind of evolved into wanting to work bigger. And so that's how I've sort of evolved into murals. And then again, it's about retraining yourself and developing a style that works, to be able to take what you're doing on a canvas and then transfer that into a wall, that's something that's visually appealing, but still telling a story. I don't want to charge people, $1 million for a painting. I want to have as many paintings as I can in as many schools, in as many public spaces, and in as many people's houses as I can, because that's a continuous reminder of Aboriginal culture, and the Aboriginal people are here. We still exist, and we've evolved as a group of artists to create different work, to what people expect from us. So I've been married, obviously, but I'm not married now. I've got a new partner, Kirsten. She's ultra supportive of who I am as an Aboriginal person, but also really supportive of me as an Aboriginal artist, which is really important because that's something that I probably struggled with, over a number of years. I've got my mum and dad are still around. My dad wasn't overly excited when I said to him I'm going to quit my job and become a full-time artist. I'm not sure that he reflected on that as being a career opportunity, but now I think he's seen a change and he can see that I'm making a career out of it, that it isn't just about the art. There's a whole lot of other stuff that comes in behind that. And I've got a sister and I've got 4 kids. So Scott Jr., he's a musician. Jake, he's a musician, gamer, whatever they do these days, young people. My daughter's 18, she works in schools as an SSO, and she's wanting to be an animator. And then I've got Riley, he's the youngest, and he's still at school, and he just wants to be a basketballer, I think. So yeah, it's a good family. My grandma's gone, but I've got a massive family of cousins and stuff, and just all over the place. So I've still got my nana on my mum's side in Loxton in the Riverland. I've got plenty of family up there, but I've got lots of other people that I consider to be family. When you're an Aboriginal person, you're never without anyone by your side. There's always plenty of other Aboriginal people there to pick you up and lift you up and support you through life. I guess I'm thankful for the opportunities that I've been given. I think that one of the things that everyone often forgets is that we can all go back generations and see that our families struggled through harder times than we're struggling through right now. In particular for Aboriginal people, but anyone. It doesn't matter if you're Aboriginal or not, And I guess for me, it's like all of that stuff that my ancestors went through, my grandmother, she, being stolen from her family and not seeing her family ever again, to go through all of that and then not bring my dad and his siblings up as bitter about the world. And then for my dad to, instill in me a sense of, you get out of life what you put into it. I guess it's those opportunities that I've been given. And you know yourself, when you're young, you don't kind of ever reflect on things your parents have told you. But then as you get older and you start saying them to your own kids, that you realise that, we've all been given a lot of opportunities, and some of us take them and some of us don't, and that's fine. I understand there's lots of barriers for people for why they don't reach their full potential. But for me, it's constantly striving to be a better person than I was before, than what I was yesterday, to be a better person today, And so that's I'm grateful for those opportunities that I'm given every day. Yeah, so I guess for me, Rusted Tin's been a brand that I've been sort of playing around with since I was, sort of 14, 15 years old. And, always envisaged, having my own art shop and gallery, and I'm hoping that that's something in the next couple of years that I'll be able to achieve. My partner and I are really focused on trying to set up something in the Port Adelaide Enfield Council area, having our own gallery space and giving young Aboriginal people an opportunity. So since I was sort of 14, 15, Rusted Tin's been around. The name Rusted Tin sort of comes from what's left of the mission and the life that my grandmother had. And so it's kind of, it's not something that's, that many people regularly ask me about or talk to me about. On this shirt here, I don't have the logo, but the little logo is kind of the profile of corrugated iron. And so, yeah, it's sort of all just in that sort of memory of what's left of the area where my grandmother was brought up.